Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. It has been quite a while now where I have honestly just been crazy busy and have not had the opportunity to film, and there was one day in the last couple of weeks where I was really planning to film, but I was sick that day and it just has not been working out. Basically, all of this is to say that it's almost the end of May now, so I never got the chance to do an April wrap up, and this video right now is just going to be a joint April and May wrap up, and I'm going to talk about all of those books. It's May 28th today, so my goal is to fit in one more book for the month of May. I'd like to read Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, but I'm just gonna go with what I've finished to this day because obviously we're encompassing almost all of May as well. So that will include April, I read 7 books, and then in May I have read 5 books. Obviously that will be 6 if I do manage to finish one more. So these have been my lowest number of books for the year so far. When you talk about reading, up until March, I was really kind of killing it, and then in April and May, I've just been busier, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing because I've been liking the books that I've been reading, but I just have not had as much time, and then on top of that, a couple of the books that I've been reading have been pretty long as well, so that's a contributing factor. But I'm just gonna get right into it, and I'm gonna go in the order that I finished all of these books, right from the start of April all the way until now. So the very first book that I finished in the month of April was Cold West by Clayton Snyder, and so this was for reading all of these SPIFBO 9 finalists with Mel's Takeover, and this was the final book that I needed to finish to complete all 10 of those. So it peaked a little bit into April, but for the most part I was all finished, and this book actually has a review on my channel. I reviewed it in one of my batch SPIFBO 9 reviews for the finalists, so if you're looking for more detail, you can go there for sure to hear more of my in-depth thoughts. But I gave Cold West somewhere between a 3 and a 3.5. I gave it a 3 on Goodreads, but a 3.5 on Storygraph. I think I just felt that it didn't quite round up to a 4 on Goodreads. I always just do it based on vibes. However, Cold West is the story of our main character, who is kind of like a fantasy version of a cowboy. He has a dark past, but he settled down with his wife and they had 2 sons, but now his wife has passed away and he is struggling to look after his sons, and he ends up trying to take on this bounty with a man from his past, and he doesn't want to go back into this life, but he takes it on because he needs the money in order to help feed his sons, continue raising his sons properly. So this does have a bit of a heartbreaking beginning because he really struggles with the loss of his wife and he is in a dark place, but this very quickly goes into kind of a direction that you're not expecting, and it is quite short, so I don't really want to say more about it than that. However, it was a very interesting and unique take. I've never really read a fantasy western before, so I did think it was very unique, and the writing style was very it had a lot of personality, and so there were definitely things to like about it. I didn't end up loving it, but I still think it's worth a look if you think it sounds interesting. Next up, we had The History of the World in Bite-Sized Chunks by Emma Marriott, which is exactly what it sounds like, and to be honest, I gave this book 3.5 stars, and the average rating that I'm giving it isn't really a reflection of what the book promises and then delivers, because I do feel like it delivers exactly what it promises, but I think that what it loses in the process of that is anything more interesting than a surface level analysis. And I think that I even attempted to read this slowly so that I could read a section and take it in and process it, but I think that the weakness of this is that there are so many tidbits fed to you that you basically forget them. It's really hard to remember the information that this book gives you because you move on from it so quickly and it's just over so fast. So I guess it's a tough one because it does give you exactly what it says it gives you. It just didn't really work for me, learning the information in that format. So I think what I would like to do from this is to pick a couple of subjects that I'm more interested in, and then try and pick up a book that actually delves a little bit more into that. I think that that would work a lot better for me. Next up is a very exciting read because it was my highest rated book of the month of April, and it's the start of an incredible journey, and that is Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. So this was wild. Like, I didn't really know what to expect going in because I have spent the last like 3 years on YouTube dodging and weaving my way through like Malazan spoilers. Not even that people are bad for them, but knowing the way that people talk about this series, I actually wanted to go into it knowing as little as possible. So even if people have non-spoiler reviews or non-spoiler discussions, I simply have not watched them. I have not consumed that content. So it was a really fascinating little journey going into this, not knowing what to expect. And honestly, I loved it. Steven Erikson is a fantastic writer. This is such an inventive and expansive world. And like, I know that I'm not saying anything here that is different from what everybody says about this series, but I was just so enthralled by like how all of the characters and storylines were dealt with and how they wove together, but how different a lot of the characters were and how you were trying to kind of parse their motivations. And it's all woven so well with the world building, and there's so much to this world. And I love a world that has sort of like a focus on gods and folklore of the world and like stuff to dig into. And like when a story and life takes on a larger significance than like just the human aspect, like when there's magic or when there's gods that are involved, like I've always found that really awesome. And one of the things that I love about fantasy, and this series seems like it's going to have it in spades. And so there was so much to love about Gardens of the Moon. I think that it took me a little bit to hit my stride and get my balance, but overall, like, I don't really have anything negative to say about this. Like, it was a great start to the journey, and I'm just hoping that, like, people say Dead House Gates and Memories of Ice are even better, so I'm just hoping to love the subsequent books even more. And as we are here at the end of May, like current day, I am planning to read Dead House Gates in June, because my goal ideally is to read one of these books every other month, and hopefully that will continue working for me. I may have to reorganize if Oathbringer and Memories of Ice end up in the same month, because I don't know if I can handle that, but on average, I'm hoping to like read one of these every other month and finish the series in like 20 months or so, because, you know, these are big books, and even if I love them, which, like, this is a great sign that I will love them, it's just a lot to handle. Like, I like feeling like I am actually finishing a book instead of reading the same book for like 2 weeks. So I like to have that balance, but this was great. Next up, we had Long Shadow by Olivia Atwater. This was sort of like my palette cleanser after Gardens of the Moon, and this is the third book in the Regency Fairy Tales series. So I gave this 3.5 stars. I still very much enjoyed it, but I think that Half a Soul just captured my heart so much. I love that book so much. 10,000 Stitches I really, really enjoyed, not quite as much as Half a Soul, and then this is basically one that I quite enjoyed, but then again, not quite as much as 10,000 Stitches, but that's not to say anything negative about it. It's just that this one didn't like capture me as much, but it still had all of the same similar appeal. But in this one, we're actually dealing with the new generation. So we have Abigail Wilder, who is the daughter of some people who, I don't want to spoil like the earlier books, I don't know, but we have Abigail, and they're having some problems with like dark fairies, and they don't really know. There's been girls disappearing and they don't know who's been doing it. So they are trying to solve this mystery, and Abigail ends up meeting Mercy, who is like a street rat, and they end up forming a relationship and working together, but like they're both kind of keeping secrets. But this is quite a sweet romance as well. This is, in my mind, more YA than the others, just because like Abigail and Mercy and their romance we're dealing with, they're a lot younger. So they're still very sweet, but it just kind of has a different tone than like Half a Soul, for example. But I think that probably Abigail and Mercy's like romance was one of my favorite parts about the book, and I did like the way that the mystery unraveled, and I did really enjoy it. So really, like, there's nothing to say against continuing in this series, because I think that if you already like what it's giving you, it will continue giving you more of that. And maybe part of it is that it is more of the same, and that if she does write another book in this series, I would like if it had a little flavor of something different, but maybe that's just me. It was still good, so I would still recommend it. Next up, we have None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, which is essentially like a psychological suspense novel. I suppose it could be called a thriller as well, but it's less thrilling in an external sense. It's more like this sense of unease and foreboding and people who are acting in ways that make you feel uncomfortable throughout the whole book. So this one, I gave 4.25 stars. Did I say that? I don't know if I said that. 4.25 stars. And this, I feel like the way to describe it sounds weird at first, but we have two main characters in this book, Josie and Alex. And the first character that we meet is Josie. She is out to dinner with her husband celebrating her 45th birthday. Her husband is quite a bit older than her, but when Josie and her husband are at this restaurant, she sees another woman also celebrating her 45th birthday, and so she kind of approaches her and is like, oh, we're birthday twins. Like, that's kind of how they meet. And then she realizes that this woman, Alex, is a podcaster, and Josie is kind of like, oh, I have a story for you. Like, Alex is a podcaster that interviews women that have these stories of them being like strong and resilient, whether it's like starting their own business or how they have persevered through adversity and stuff like that. But she kind of wants to make a change, and she's wanting to take her podcast in a new direction. So our other character, Josie, is like, oh, I can tell you a story about like my past and like what has happened to me and stuff like that. And it's more of like the suggestion is that it's more of a darker story. And so they kind of start recording this podcast. Josie sort of starts like insinuating herself into Alex's life, and it kind of goes from there. Things get unsettling. And the name of this book, in my opinion, is very apt because you're left with a lot of questions at the end. And I really won't say too much more than that about the plot because there's a lot to be uncovered and not all of it is super shocking. I didn't really find that to be the point of the book. I found the point of the book to be more about all of the characters and how imperfect and unlikable they can be, and how like unreliable and untrustworthy a lot of people can be, how you might hear a story in very different ways from different people and not be sure what to believe, not to be sure what's actually true. And that to me was the strength of this, and I was really fascinated with it. So I'm happy to have read this, and I'm not sure if any of Lisa Jewell's other works really call to me or appeal to me, but seeing as how I really enjoyed this, I would be willing to pick up other things from her in the future. Next up, we have Lives of Girls and Women by Alice Munro, and I will actually just start by saying like rest in peace to Alice Munro, because between reading this book in late April and now, she actually passed away at the age of, I believe it was 92 or 91. And not only is Alice Munro the recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature, she is Canadian, and she actually attended the same university that I attended. So as soon as I found out all of these facts about her, I had decided that I wanted to read from her. And this is an interesting book because it definitely reads like a classic, and it definitely reads like an internally emotional coming of age story of a young girl. So I gave it 3.5 stars. It was definitely sort of like slow and pondering, but it was beautifully written. And this is one of those books where sort of like it's one of the books where it makes you think of the nature of girlhood and the nature of womanhood and how we evolve internally and how we take like what the world tells us we should be, and how vulnerable and impressionable you can be throughout your formative ages, and how like you act and react and form friendships, and whether your friendships survive or not, and how you might like act and feel in a certain situation. And honestly, I thought that it was very raw and very like evocative of that internal type feelings, and it's so interesting because another book that I think gave me the same feeling was The Girls by Emma Cline, which talks about a girl who gets sucked into the cult and then into everything that happened with the Manson family. But this is not the same way at all plot-wise, but it's that internal like feeling of the way that you are as a girl in your formative years, like as a teenager. And it's so hard to explain, but it's done so beautifully through books like this. So I really, really thought that that was so well done and beautifully written. And I do want to read more from Alice Munro. It's weird because, like, did I love this book? No, but I really loved certain things about it, and I think that there were things that she did extremely well, so I would definitely like to experience more of her writing. Okay, so next up, and my last read for the month of April, was The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, which is a new release, like not new now, but came out this spring in 2024, and I was very intrigued by this because this is set in the golden age of Spain, and our main character Luzia is, I don't know exactly what the right word for it is, but she has magic, but she works as like a scullery maid for a minor house, and she kind of uses her small magics to get through the day, like she might fix a burnt loaf of bread or something small like that. But the lady of the house ends up kind of catching her and discovering her magic, and she starts to exploit her, like showing her off at parties and stuff, because they are not super rich or super in favor socially. So she wants to use Luzia to gain that favor and to gain like notoriety and social class. And this like action and this snowball effect ends up with somebody else noticing this and honing in on Luzia for a potential competition, for the king is looking for a miracle worker essentially. And so there are people that are being called to compete, and that will be chosen because the king needs a person that can work miracles. So this book, I was really hoping to like it more than I did, to be honest with you. I gave this 3.25 stars, and there is so much here that just has such potential, because there's also another layer to the story where Luzia has Jewish heritage, and the Spanish Inquisition is a massive danger to people with Jewish heritage, and so she has to hide herself, and she is deathly afraid of drawing attention to herself, which is what happens throughout the course of this plot. She ends up drawing a lot of attention to herself, and there is a lot of ambiance, like the setting and the magic and this like medieval, well, not medieval, but like golden age of Spain setting. Like all of these things combined, I would think would work so well for me, but they just didn't do a ton for me. So it was just really unfortunate, because it's really hard to say why this was a bit of a miss for me. Like, it also definitely has a romance element, and that is where the title of The Familiar comes in. And I enjoyed the interactions between those characters, and there were definitely interesting character relationships to be built throughout this, and there was also interesting relationships between Luzia and the other like contestants in this eventual king's competition. But I don't know, maybe it was the pacing that threw me off, maybe it was the plotting, but there were parts where I was bored, and then there were parts that I felt like we were moving so fast that I didn't feel like it matched up with the timeline that we had been setting for ourselves so far. So unfortunately, this one was just kind of a miss for me. I really wish that I liked it more, and even now I kind of wish I could tell you more about why it didn't work for me, because I'm having such a hard time identifying why. But I really hope that if you've read this, you liked it more than I did, I guess. Okay, so moving into what I have read in the month of May, we are going to start with Snuff by Terry Pratchett, which is the final book, unfortunately, in the City Watch subseries of Discworld. We're all finished with this subseries. At some point, I will definitely want to reread these. However, I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4.25 stars, and Thud was okay, but after Night Watch being so phenomenal, I felt like Snuff recaptured a little bit more of that energy and a little bit more of the magic of the earlier books in the series. Like, not the literal magic, but that feeling that I had while reading it. Because Snuff takes Sam Vimes and Sybil and young Sam, and they go out, like, Sybil decides that Vimes needs a vacation. They go out to her family's country estate outside of the city, and when they get there, they learn that there is plotting afoot. Sam Vimes can't take 2 steps without being a cop, but being the most moral and upstanding cop, but he can't ignore it. And this crime that is being committed and this plot that he's unraveling, it has to do with goblins, and goblins are definitely an underprivileged class of being. A lot of places still consider them as vermin at this point in this world, and they are victims of slavery, and so it deals with a lot of those themes, and it deals with him trying to essentially uncover something that nobody else is really willing to put in a whole lot of work towards, because goblins are the ones suffering and nobody is really putting in all that much effort for goblins. So it definitely has that Sam Vimes charm, and I really, really enjoyed this. I thought that it was really well plotted, it had great pacing, and I just had a really good time all the way through. Next up, we have this book by Agatha Christie that does appear to be called A Haunting in Venice, but the movie A Haunting in Venice is the cover for this, and the title of the original book is actually Halloween Party. So I didn't realize this until reading the introduction in here, but the movie A Haunting in Venice is not actually a direct adaptation. It takes the basic outline of this novel, which is that a murder takes place at a Halloween party, and then it takes it in a different direction. So the book is actually not the same plot as the movie, and so I wouldn't feel right like even saying that the book has the title A Haunting in Venice, because it's not actually the same story. However, they've obviously still incorporated a movie cover. But this one's kind of acceptable to me because it doesn't totally look like a movie cover. It still looks like it could be a book cover. But, you know, all that aside, like I said, this book starts with a murder being committed at a Halloween party, and unfortunately this murder is of a 13-year-old girl. And earlier during the setup for this party, this girl could be heard saying that she had witnessed a murder happening. And everybody kind of thinks that she's lying because she's the type of girl to really embellish her stories, but the question becomes after her murder, well, did she really see something and somebody heard her say it and was trying to silence her? So that's kind of where we leap off from into the investigation, and I gave this book 3 stars. I thought it was okay. Like, I always enjoy a Hercule Poirot mystery regardless, but this one was really slow, and it had a lot of elements that were more modern. Like, this was one of the later books, I think, to be written clearly, and it just felt very asynchronous with the time that I picture Poirot operating in. Like, it felt so modern that I felt myself jarred by like the language that was being used and stuff like that. So it was okay. Like, I didn't hate the resolution of the mystery. It was all just kind of fine. So just kind of describe the experience as a whole as just being fine. Next up, we have one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Words of Radiance. My reread of this happened in May for the preparation for Wind and Truth, and like, this book is still just so good. Like, I feel like on this reread, I actually feel kind of equal about Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, but that for me is more in the fact that I feel like Way of Kings moved up to Words of Radiance level, and then Words of Radiance just like retained its status as one of the best fantasy books that I've ever read. Like, this just takes everything that's good about Way of Kings and that's set up in it and just continues on. Kaladin and Shallan experience so much growth in this book, and I continue to enjoy Dalinar so much. Dalinar has definitely, you know, the interesting thing about this reread, and I was talking to Ben about this, is that on my first read, I think Kaladin was definitely my favorite character, and don't get me wrong, like, I loved a lot of the other characters, but Kaladin was my favorite character. And on this read, I just feel like they're all my favorite character. Like, it's this weird feeling where the characters in my estimation are just a lot more equal. And maybe it's because I'm using my whole experience of the series so far and I'm looking at it through a different lens, and I know more about what these characters do in the future, or what they are, or what they become. But I'm reading it this time, and like, to me, I enjoy Dalinar and Adolin and Renarin and Yasna and Navani and like Teft and Rock and like obviously Shallan too. That's kind of a given, but just like, I don't know. There's this whole cast of characters that on my first read, they seemed a lot more secondary, and on this read, I'm just enjoying them a lot more equally. And it gives a different cast to the book, but it's just as good and just as enjoyable, and I'm just having so much fun rereading this series. So I'm going to be very interested to see what I think of Oathbringer on this second read, because Oathbringer is the one that to me on the first read felt the longest, but I have a feeling that I'm going to appreciate some of those earlier storylines more this time. So here's hoping, and if for some reason you have not read the Stormlight Archive yet, don't let the length of the books intimidate you, at least not that much, because I truly feel that these are some of the easiest long books you could ever read. Like, I fly through them, and I know Brandon Sanderson's prose helps with that, but I truly fly through them. So yeah, only positive things to say. I don't know if I could have picked a more different book to come on the heels of Words of Radiance, but next up we have The Clarion by Nina Dunich, and this is one that was actually recommended to me by somebody that I know in real life, because this is an author that he knows, and he wanted to get some more people reading this book, so he recommended it to me to get my opinion on it, and I really enjoyed this. So like I said, very different from Words of Radiance. This is a short literary fiction book. I gave this 4 stars. I thought it was very, very solid and very good. And this follows 2 characters, Peter and Stasia, or Anastasia. And this is really kind of a quiet, internal character exploration of our main characters in small moments. So Peter, our male character, the brother of this brother-sister pair, is a trumpet player, and we begin with him going to an audition, and he goes through the audition, and then later we see him going to work. He works in a kitchen. We see his home life, but we really see like his internal thoughts and how he moves through life, how he deals with it, how he processes things. And it's the same with Stassi. So they call her Stasia, they call her Anastasia, but I think mostly they call her Stassi. So she begins the book losing out on a promotion to VP of a company that she has been with forever and has helped build. And so this essentially sends her for a bit of a breakdown, and she tries therapy, and we explore that with her, and we explore how she copes with her relationship with her husband and daughter by having an affair, and we follow her through some of those more guilty private moments where she is not necessarily a character that is doing the right thing, but it's really more about us exploring her emotional journey throughout these things that she's doing. And we do see these siblings interact with each other. We see the dynamic, we hear about their parents, and it's very interesting because these two are very separate throughout most of the book, but you can tell that their upbringing has had a large impact on who they are and how they interact with the world, and the writing is beautiful. I thought that the prose was so good, there's so much lush description, and it's very evocative. Like, the nature of a book like this, about it being so emotionally driven, in my opinion, it has to be written well in order for it to come across. And it was done so well. So I really, really appreciated that. And if you are the literary fiction type of reader and you like a quiet story like this, I would 100% recommend The Clarion, because it just seems like it would be perfect for you. The last book that I have to talk about in this video is a book that I finished yesterday, actually, and that is Empire of Exiles by Erin M. Evans. So I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4.25 stars. Actually, now that I'm looking, I haven't had a 5-star read in a while because, like, obviously Words of Radiance, it does count, but that's a reread, so I really need to get back on my 5-star energy. However, this still was a great book, and I think that it's extremely unique, and that is one of its biggest strengths because in this, we're dealing with a lot of interesting sort of political structure, and I don't exactly know what it's inspired by just because I honestly don't know enough history to know what it's inspired by. But in this book, we essentially have this empire called Semilla, and this is composed of essentially a bunch of exiled peoples because this entire continent used to be home to all of these different essentially nationalities, these different kingdoms, and they were all forced to retreat to this one little corner of their continent as a result of changelings coming in and like burrowing into their systems and taking down these kingdoms and these empires and essentially going to war with the humans and chasing them away. And so now all of that's left of humanity lives in this one corner called Semilla that did have an existing peoples that lived there before, but this remaining part of humanity is protected by a salt wall because changelings are affected by iron, they're affected by salt, so this keeps them out. And the peoples of all of these former kingdoms, they all live in the same place, and they all kind of have like smaller seats of power. They have much diminished populations, and they all live in this one region. And so of course, you have a lot of political tensions, you have a lot of different cultures that kind of vie for attention, like you have melting pots of cities, and you have these different institutions that deal with the law in different ways, but our main kind of focus here is that approximately 20 years ago, there was a rebellion where there was one duke, that was the Duke of Courage, which is one of the former kingdoms, that staged an uprising against the emperor and tried to take over the empire, but was sort of defeated. And now what they did to forge an alliance at the time was to provide a marriage between one of the sons of the one family and the daughter of the actual ruling family from before the rebellion. And so a peace has been forged, but there's still members of this family that weren't the ones that tried to incite the rebellion, but they were part of that family. And so they have been kind of looking around the imperial archives and trying to get access to some of these old artifacts that were part of the spark, I guess you could call it, for the rebellion. And while members of this family are requesting access to these artifacts, there's also a gruesome murder that takes place involving some pretty important political figures that looks like it could have some ties to the previous revolution and coup. So there is a mystery to be unraveled here. There is also a very interesting magic system here where not only do we have this existence of changelings, people that can choose to look like, well, I guess they're technically not people, but beings that can choose to look like any other person, which is very unsettling. We also have what are called specialists, or people with affinities, and this basically provides you with a magical ability, but you also have dangers to these magics. You have people can come into alignment, which I guess could be sort of thought of as a moon cycle, where when the moon is full, werewolves are in danger of losing control. When a specialist, say it's a bronze specialist or a bone specialist, when they come into alignment, being in proximity to bronze would be dangerous for them and they could spiral out of control. Or being in proximity to bone would be dangerous, and they can lose themselves in their own power and provide quite a lot of destructive force in the process. But on the other hand, these people are very useful for working in the archives and for the empire because they know their own like substance better than anyone else, and they are very useful. So this is actually very complex. I'm trying to think about how to explain this book, and I'm failing miserably. I'm rambling, but the main thing that we focus on here is that we are trying to solve these murders. We're trying to solve how they might be related to members of the royal family and how they might be related to these artifacts that still exist in the Imperial archives and how everything comes together. And it's quite a journey how to get there. So I really liked the characters. I really liked the the complex magic and political system. I loved how it all came together. So I already went out and bought the sequel to this. I'm sorry that I've failed so badly at explaining what this is about. However, I would recommend it. I thought it was really unique. So if you're looking for something a little bit different that doesn't necessarily follow the exact beats that you're thinking that it will, then I would definitely recommend this. And I hope that more people pick it up and enjoy it. Okay, so now that I have been talking for way too long, that is it for this video. Wow, imagine if I read like 13 books every month. I don't know how the people who read like 20 books a month even do their wrap-ups. Like, major respect, because clearly I just talk way too much. Like, I don't even have a concept of how long I've been talking about each book. I don't know how you guys are so concise and you rein yourselves in. But anyway, that is my wrap up of April and May, with the caveat that I am hoping to read one more book in May, but pretty close to talking about everything that I read in the past 2 months. So that is going to be it for this one. I really hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think of any of these books down in the comments. If you've read them, I would love to hear from you. Please do like this video and subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. As always, I will have the links to my Discord and other socials down in the description if you're interested in any of that stuff, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!